through that, call it destruction, like lack of confidence, lack of belief in self, a lot of things that snowboarding teaches you the opposite, right? It's like visualization, confidence, seeing it, doing it, right? Like all the stuff now would be like manifesting and all that stuff. Like we didn't have the language back then, but we were living it. A lot of that just kind of gets washed away in times where you're really upside down.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. I'm Chris Naugle, and this is the Money School podcast. But today, we're not going to just talk money. We're going to talk about ass kickings. That's right. We're going to talk about the ass kickings you take in life and in business. And we're going to get into snowboarding. Why? Because I've got a legend with me today, Keir Dillon. Back in my day of snowboarding, he was the quintessential rider that everybody wanted to be. He had style that nobody could match, and everybody tried just ripping it off, but we couldn't do it. So we're going to talk a little bit about the good old snowboard years. We're also going to go into what happens after the glorious snowboarding or professional career ends and life kicks in. And you got to figure out what's next. Keir, welcome to the show.
I appreciate it, Chris. Like you said, kicking ass and definitely getting your ass kicked. So happy to be on here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So offline, folks, we were talking a little bit about Mount Hood. Now, for those of you that don't snowboard, Mount Hood is where all of us snowboarders go in the summer because it's a glacier. So we can go ride all summer long, and then we come back to our hometowns or get on planes and go wherever we want. But Mount Hood has got a special place for all of us. And Keir had an opportunity to go do a really special event and just kind of go hang with some homies in Mount Hood. And talking about ass kicking, you know, like, all snowboarders, like if you've kind of gone through the realms that we have, you know, in our mind, we're still 18 years old. I don't care what you want to tell me that I am from an age standpoint. And Keir, I'm sure it's the same for you, man. When I strap the board on, I'm between 18 and 26, depending on how I'm feeling and how many Red Bulls I had. So when you went out to Hood, like, just tell that story of what happened, because you sort of got your ass kicked.
Well, like I said, I think first it's, you know, to have done something for, I don't know, 30 plus years, you know, the quintessential, it's just like getting back on a bike. It feels that way, right? It's like you're instantly, your brain and the muscle memory is there, but I'm old, I'm fat and out of shape, and your brain may be there, but the body definitely wasn't reacting the same. But, you know, like you said, the vibes up there are super high. All the friends, I've spent, I think, 20 summers there. It's a magical place, as you shared. It's, you know, above the clouds, just on a volcano, snowboarding. And they do an amazing job with their features and conditions. So the vibes were good. And I was just like, hey, let's go hit another park, and went to go hit a jump. Ed just slipped out. You know, it was this pretty small hit and just landed on my side, got concussed, but was black and blue my whole side. Calling my wife, I'm like, baby, I got hurt. She's like, how hurt did you get? And I'm like, it was mellow, right? Like, because she would definitely start freaking out, which it kind of was and wasn't. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's all part of it, right? It's the I think in any part, whether it's sports or life, whatever, usually sports has a faster feedback loop. But it's like, hey, if you're not going to be in shape, if you're not going to bring your A game, then you can't function at that level. So maybe it's time to get back in the gym and actually get after it, because it was just way too much fun not to keep that a part of my life and to do that every summer, and obviously do it in the winter. So yeah, you know,
it was super fun to watch you guys out there. And, you know, deep down, I'm like, why am I not there? Obviously, that's the first thing that crosses my mind. I'm like, wait, I know him. Oh, why? He's there too. Why am I not there? Yeah. But anyway, you know, it's super fun. But, you know, I want to kind of go back to, you know, your snowboarding career. I just want to bring my audience a little bit into that world from your eyes. I mean, can you just take everybody through, like, you know, where you first got turned on to snowboarding, and then how it happened? How did you become a world sensation and just literally dominate, you know, the sport at that time? And then I want to then pause, and I want to then talk about what happened that ended that career.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, rural. My closest neighbor was probably 2 miles away. Somewhat single mom raising me, 3 other brothers. So we were just complete lunatics. And I think my mom, trying to keep us out of trouble, she got us into skiing and skateboarding. And, you know, snowboarding was kind of that new thing that when you're growing up on a mountain that's 400 feet tall, snowboarding actually made it fun again, right? It's like, oh, I can actually try to do some tricks. And this is back when you could go on Thursday nights at, or just Thursday at night and no other days. And like, we were complete outlaws, but that was also part of it, like the counterculture of it and building community through other people that, shared the same psychosis that I had. And whether it's BMX, skateboarding, snowboarding. And it was an outlet, right? Like I had ADHD growing up and dyslexia, and it was just this common thread of like, when I would show up and snowboard with people, it's like, dude, you're just like me, right? And like things that we're into. And then you just, like anything, you fall deep into it and you just start nerding out and, learning who the pros are and getting all the videos and the magazines. And I think around age 6, now it's probably like 11 to 14, age 15, 16, started doing contests, like super small, just local contests. But back then there was snowboard shops, as you know, because you had one, but like snowboard shops where they would actually have teams and those teams would help promote their shops. So there was this snowboard shop called Starting Gate. They had a team. They brought me onto it. Now I'm traveling with some older kids and, being exposed to, a little bit more of like Vermont and some other areas and just trying to be pushed. And then a snowboard rep from Burton Snowboards saw me at an event. And me being a little cocky kid I was at 15, I was like, oh, yeah, you're going to sponsor me. And he's like, oh, sure I am. And
was that Mike?
Yeah, Mike Hofer. Yep.
Mr. Range Rover.
Yeah. And, we're still friends to this day. He supported me throughout my whole career. Love him to death. Awesome human. But he, he saw something in me that, could, hopefully push some snowboards and just, had a spark and something that we could work together with. Got on Burton, started traveling. Back then it wasn't anything real, right? It wasn't like, oh, I want to go be pro or I want to go be Shaun White. There wasn't a Shaun White. It was just something fun to do. And eventually we started making a little bit of money, but even that it didn't feel like something that was real. As the years progressed and as the Olympics came on board, that was a little bit more of like, hey, Mom, I don't want to go to college. I want to go to the Olympics. And that was kind of a way to get out of going to school. But I think like anything, you just get into it, you fall in love with it. And before you know, you're doing it a lot and hopefully around good people that can expose you to all the other things that you need to build. It's not just the sports, but all aspects of being an athlete. And I'd say a lot of hard work and just even more luck, right? I mean, it's I think life in general is a luck game. Obviously we can help create it, but and then just like anything, just keep going and grinding through the ups and the downs and the lack of belief at sometimes and the full on belief at others.
I think one cool thing you talked about there is you mentioned it wasn't even real. It was sort of just like we were just out doing what we loved and you were just doing what you loved. You got an opportunity with Mike, he saw something in you and kind of opened the door. And back then, pro riders to Burton were everything. I mean, it was a different time where the riders really were the face of the snowboard brands and not just the brands, but the boards. When I first started my shop in 94, the only boards kids wanted were pro models, in the clothing they wanted was the clothing they saw you guys wearing in the magazines. And you always had like just a clean style with the big headphones. So when that came out, man, I just remember kids coming in like, I want the headphones. So of course we had to get the headphones. And it just was this whole, you called it, I think, a counterculture, but it was a legit culture that people believed in. And I got a little something I wanted to show you that I think, have you seen this? Barely Made It?
Yeah.
Dude, this book, Shauna here in my office spent the better part of probably 6 months waiting and funding part of this book so that we could get it. This is any of you snowboarders out there. I don't know if you can get a copy of it, but if you can, you want to know the true history from the right perspective. This is the book. That's the one you got to get. Barely Made It. And
he did a really good job with that. I mean, it's cool too because you can see the community, you can see the trust. Obviously, there's some pictures in there that are just like, okay, those are aggressive. But yeah, that was the life. I mean, I think it's a good depiction of what snowboarding was. So
there's the man.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
totally.
I miss those days. So, but you had some tricks that you dialed in. I just want to spend just a quick second because I think this translates to a lot of other things in life. There's certain people that just have a level of perfection. And anybody that knew you snowboarding, anybody that watched the magazines, you just had tricks so dialed, so locked that you did them with beyond, like, it didn't even look like you tried. Like, you maybe just closed your eyes and put the headphones on and just floated, but you did them 6 to 8 feet. And folks, I know today, like, maybe 6 to 8 feet isn't a lot, if you're doing a trick above somebody else's trick by 6 to 8 feet. But back then that was like, you put the binoculars on and you're like, how did he go that high? But how did you perfect those tricks? I mean, did you just drill them over and over again? I just think there's something to that persistent, consistent action.
It's funny. A friend of mine who's a wealth manager now, actually, super highly successful, but he always, when we link up, he's like, I remember you used to just train, or like just be hitting it, and we'd be inside playing Uno, and I don't, as I was doing it, I don't think I looked at it so much as like training. I thoroughly just loved doing it, right? I loved competing. I still to this day love competing. I've matured now where I won't lose friendships over games of Uno, but I'll still give it my all. But yeah, I think it's especially when I started getting into contests, you kind of know if you want to compete, the formula that this is what these people are going to be doing. This is what you kind of need to do to be able to place. This is what you need to do if you need to be able to win. So I think it's just being competitive, wanting to win, and kind of reverse engineering, where's the goal and then how are you going to get there? I remember later with Shaun White, and like the thing that blew my mind was his ability to beat everyone at 80%. Right. So like when you're watching him on TV and you're like, oh, he's got to land this run and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, it's a run he's done 1,000 times and he can land it in his sleep. Right. So it's like, to the spectator, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so much pressure. But for him, he's like, I could show up at Breckenridge and do it first try. Right. So I think it was always that aspect of like trying to get your tricks that dialed that you can just pull them out, unlock, and land them. Obviously I was no Shaun White, but it's like that, I think, that formula. And that's if you want to have that as your path, right? Because you could film, there's like millions of avenues that you could express yourself through snowboarding. For me, it was just, I loved contests. So if you're going to do it, you might as well do it. And that was just kind of my philosophy behind it.
And there's an interesting thing that Teddy and me were talking about in his episode about the money aspect of snowboarding and how that's changed. Now, you would think snowboarding's become like just a mega sport, an Olympic sport. It's on everything. I don't think there's a single big brand that hasn't used snowboarding in their marketing. But back then, that wasn't the case. The companies didn't use snowboarders unless they were edgy, like maybe Mountain Dew a little bit later started using snowboarding. But the thing that was different is back then, pro athletes actually got paid pretty significant contracts. And the contest, I mean, whether it be the US Open or any of the contests back then, the paychecks were big. Can you just spend just 2 seconds talking a little bit about that dynamic? And I always like to say it's just because they valued the riders. I just feel today a pro snowboarder probably can make a lot, but it's very difficult to get to that level because there's so many other good riders that are willing to throw themselves and just break themselves for free just to get attention or get a free board, where that wasn't the case back in the day. So I just want to take a second and talk about the money aspects and what that looked like in your career.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed a lot. I think the dynamics of it have changed. I was probably part of the last generation to really make decent money. There's definitely people like Travis Rice and Shaun White and like call it 5 people in the whole industry that really make money. But I think back when I had it, there was definitely a middle class, for lack of better words, right?
Like, that's a good way to say it.
There's middle class plus you could buy houses, you could do things because, you could buy a house in Mammoth for 50,000 that now probably is 350, right? Or like a little apartment. So I think there's the multiple dynamics there, but also just back then to sell snowboards, you had shop kids, you had magazines, you had video parts, and that was it, right? There was no social media. There was no Facebook running ads. There was like no influencers. So I think what you saw for both athletes is the same thing I think you saw for just even call it Billabong, Quicksilver, core brands, where like the influence of the brand, I think, went away to where there's a lot more influences in things that consumers can buy into and take influence from, where it diluted really the pool of snowboarding. So yes, snowboarding as a sport is still very popular. It's at the Olympics. Yes, it's at X Games. But as far as the actual culture, or not culture, but the money that supports it is not really there, right? Like the the budget for pro team riders is probably 10% of what it was when I was pro.
I agree.
And it's just, I think it's just a byproduct of just business, right? Like if it's not actually driving the sales, it's hard to support it. And I think even X Games got a ton of grief and crap last year, like the year before, because they had influencers there. And it's like, cool, why is this guy here? Like, he doesn't even snowboard. Like, cool that he has 10 million followers. And I think in their minds are like, well, we need to grow this thing. And he has actually like more followers than all of you dudes put together. And I can appreciate that you're all athletes. So, right, there's like this weird dichotomy, especially because snowboarding was like, we were almost original influencers in a way, but it is just, I think a lot of those dynamics have changed to where it's really hard to make money as a pro athlete unless you almost tap into being an influencer, right? And tap into those avenues, which are also great. Like back in the day, you had to be blessed in, you had to be like the cool guy, or like if you couldn't film with Dogger or two other people, you were kind of asked out. So like now it's, if you got gumption, homies with some cameras, iPhones, you can make a name for yourself. So I think it's like anything, it's looking at it with more of a, I won't say growth mindset, but like, how do I seize the opportunity that's at hand? Not get caught up on what things were, but just, hey, if you want to play. That's why I look at it.
Yeah, I love that. Definitely it is an element of just going out and playing. And, I know the two of us stumbled upon something, and I think a lot of athletes are always looking for that. We stumbled upon Molson. Now, for those of you that maybe don't know what Molson is, but it's a beer brand, and Molson Canadian, and it's a Canadian beer brand. And they did this thing called Snow Jam, and they thought it'd be cool to bring, gosh, what they had? They had concerts, they had dirt bikes, skateboarding, and it was kind of like the early days. But then the key thing they did is they brought in these big tractor trailers filled with ice cubes, and they ground them up and they made a quarter pipe. Now, Keir was a killer half pipe rider. So I remember it was the Buffalo event, I think, and maybe a couple other ones that I saw you at, but he rolls up and I'm there, competing. And that was my first event that they brought me on for. And I remember I'm like, oh my gosh. And, right in practice, you're just doing your thing. But it was such an iconic kind of event because it was one at which athletes could come in, and there wasn't a lot of us, but we got paid really well. Almost, gosh, looking back, it's like, that was really silly money back then for what we did. I mean, first place was 10 grand. And, there was 10 riders I think they had in there, or something like 10 or 12 riders.
It was, like I said, it was magical. It was, I mean, in a lot of other places did it, like even like in Whistler, like these like summer sports festivals, right? And like I said, it bringing in kind of the snow into the summer. And but yeah, it was one of those magical times where like you said, there's 10 people there, you show up, you land a trick, and if you did well, you make 10 grand, right? And then if you have sponsors that match it, you make more. And it was just, my wife was also Canadian at the time, so it was like, right, she was from Toronto, so there's one in Toronto, there was one in Buffalo, and they were all over. And just the culture of it was insane for the people coming to watch and for us participating. But it was also just, you look back, like you were saying, you're like, it was like, that's a lot of money just to show up, have some fun, and like land a trick or two. Right. And they had skiing there too, right? Skiing and snowboarding. And then, like you said, good bands and music and good times. And I'm sure as an athlete at the time, I was still probably complaining about something.
Your real estate business lives and dies by the network and the connections that you make. I mean, after all, your network, well, it's your net worth. That's what you always heard, right? If that's an area where you desire improvement, well, Private Money Club, it's for you. PMC saves you precious time and money by bringing the real estate world, well, right to you, right in the palm of your hand. So get in on the action like so many others have by going to privatemoneyclub.com and sign up.
Oh, that was that was not my first big event, but the first big event that was a spectator event like that. And I remember I just thought, all right, I'll jump into the crowd and just kind of walk around, and they physically ripped the shirt off my back. So that's my story from that event. The shirt got ripped off my back. But let's transition now. Let's talk a little bit about the afterlife of, you're on this high of this snowboarding career where you literally are just creating your passion, you're just creating your whole existence. And then all of a sudden something happens and it's just over. What was that for you? Like, where did the party end or the show stop?
My show stopped a little later. So like towards the end of snowboarding, I got into TV hosting, and again, had good people, good opportunities, different dynamics too. The way my contract was written for snowboarding was TV was very heavily weighted. So I kind of steered towards like, oh, can I be on field TV? Could I get, TV engaged, like gigs? So the transition was actually pretty smooth because I still had somewhat sponsor support, and then also found this new passion of like, oh, I love communicating with people. I love conveying snowboarding to other people, whether it's core or just new audiences. And Field TV at the time was a huge supporter of action sports, so that was an amazing outlet. And then during that time, we'd started a headphone company with a group of 7 snowboarders. And then that really started to take off. We pivoted towards women's headphones. That was kind of our niche product, but we were in Apple and Best Buy and Target and raised a bunch of money, sold internationally. And that was kind of a 6-year process. So up until that, everything was actually somewhat smooth. Like, and I used to think that I had some struggles in life, but I look back, I'm like, that was all so easy. And then the long story short is that the company didn't work. I had invested about $1 million, my own money into it. I had to, since I was running it, I was the person that had to kind of wind it down, deal with lawsuits, all sorts of chaos, where that had just basically spun me out. And then on top of that, you had some drugs and some other things. And it was just, I'd say that was the point in my life where it was like, holy shit, like not in a million years would I ever think I could be here, especially because I had always tried to be smart with my money. And I tried not to be extravagant and buy real estate and do things. But just some bad decisions and some bad luck really just had me about as sideways as you could ever be. And that was I guess I was 38. I don't know. I was pretty old to have had a pretty smooth life up until then. And yeah, I was dead broke, finally sober then after a pretty gnarly drug stint and trying to figure out how the hell to get things back together. So.
And what did you do? I mean, so that's ass kicking number 2. So what was the climb out of that like?
It was brutal, to be honest. I DoorDashed for about a year just to literally have cash coming in. And the DoorDash was also part of getting sober. And just, and usually when you blow things up, you kind of ruin a lot of friendships too, right? That's in hindsight, you're I could have not done that. But kind of like snowboarding, you just start figuring out what am I passionate about? What do I love? And I love design work, and our designer that did all of our stuff at the headphone company, he kind of mentored me through some stuff. I love brand strategy. So I kind of opened up an agency, just one brick by brick. Right. But there was definitely times sitting in my house being oh my gosh, full just panic attack of what the hell am I doing? How am I going to make money? I also think that through that called destruction, lack of confidence, lack of belief in self, a lot of the things that snowboarding teaches you the opposite, right? It's visualization, confidence, seeing it, doing it, right? All the stuff now would be manifesting and all that stuff. We didn't have the language back then, but we were living it. A lot of that just kind of gets washed away in times where you're really upside down. So really just kind of falling into things that had worked before, not exactly the vehicle, but just kind of more the process of driving. Maybe it's not snowboarding, but now, and maybe it's business. That was kind of the rebuild. Found a new girl. She's amazing, was able to be my rock and help me build confidence back up. And yeah, it was long. It was, cause everything, right. When you're young, you can go 5 years and you don't have all the stresses, right? But when you're old, call it, and then you blow things up, and then your rebuild's 3 or 4 years. It feels like eternity because you're also navigating kids and all sorts of other things. So it's something that in hindsight, when I look back where I was in life, I needed it to blow up to refocus, relearn, just kind of rebuild foundational principles and aspects for myself. But it's still something I wouldn't wish for my worst enemy.
I love the way you described that. And I guess I don't know why. I think you were just so young and it's just was part of everything we did, but it really was manifestation. It was everything you read in Think and Grow Rich and all these books of today's time that teach you what you think is actually what really happens. And holy crap, you're the first person I've heard reference snowboarding and what snowboarders do every single day to that. And that's totally the truth. And then, followed by, how you had mentioned, when you fell on, flat on your face and you were at the bottom, sometimes that's what it takes, man. You got to hit bottom in order to see what you actually, number one, what you had, but also see the path to the next side. And it's never fast. I mean, your story is different than mine, but mine was the same kind of ass kicking straight down, and I literally contemplated, bad thoughts in my mind. I was depressed and I just didn't think I had a future. I just didn't even know what I was, because everything we had as pro snowboarders, at the top, like everything you wanted, you just created it. And then all of a sudden when it's all gone and things happen, and in your case, you had a company blow up, it's very difficult to think at that moment when you're in it that there's another side to it. And folks that I want all of you that are listening to really think about that. I don't know, someone on this podcast or listening to this needed to hear that, because somebody's hanging on by a pinky, and they don't tell anybody because today it's like hush, hush, but somebody's hanging on by a pinky, and hearing that about how you were hanging on by barely a pinky, but then you just started finger by finger, grabbing a hold of it and climbing your way back out. That's the way, but you have to do it, because now you're doing a lot of things today. But before we get to these other things, like, I think we've covered 2 ass kickings, maybe 3. But wasn't there a real estate ass kicking that I feel like if we missed that, I'd be doing a huge disservice. So let's hit ass kicking real estate mode.
Having spent a lot of time at Mammoth and seeing people, as I mentioned earlier, buy apartments for 40 grand and then they were worth like 250 or 300. And I've always loved real estate, but this is back before YouTube. This is back before really you could have access to smart minds. And I would like buy books, but the books, number one, I hated reading, but it just wasn't the same. So I had met with a guy, actually a friend of mine's father, and I was like, oh, I want to build a place in Mammoth. And he's like, oh, I can do them. I had like these kind of prefab, basically they bring them on in kind of cranes. It's not modular completely, but it's like, and it's, he showed me some videos and I was like, oh, that looks simple. So it's about 2008, bought the land, 2009, started building. It ended up going from like a $1 million project to $2 million. It's actually was featured on MTV Cribs, which your listeners are probably too young to even know what that show is. But it was a beautiful home. It was, and as we're building it, I remember just like, this is again, 2009, 2010, the market's just getting ready to slide and it starts to slide. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're just like finishing this $2 million house. And I was making money then, but still not enough to cover. I had a house in Vancouver, a house in Carlsbad, and then this. So we started VRBOing it because there wasn't, I don't think, Airbnb back then. And it was working. We were actually making about $150 a year covering the mortgage. But in Mammoth, they don't allow you to actually have short-term rentals. So it's like what was working for a little bit then got shut down. And I think at that time the market had fully crashed. And yeah, I long story short was I short sold it for $850. Oh. I mean, the house is brand new. It was 3,600 square feet. Awesome, beautiful spot. But again, in hindsight, it's like I did very little research. I trusted one guy's opinion. I just like jumped in, and because that was, I guess, my real first ass kicking of like a lot of money. And it was also in hindsight, like, why didn't I just build like a small house? Right. I was like,
yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like,
right. It was like, so I got caught up in the hype of like, oh, I could flip this or whatever I was thinking, which I'm sure at the time was logical. Hopefully every decision you make during the time is logical. But yeah, clearly it wasn't. And I appreciate you for letting me relive that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Scab needed picking.
Oh, yes. Listen, we've all had those, but man, I can't help but to think that house and what it could be worth today. I have the same story. I had 36 apartments, that I built from 2009 to 14. And I ended up having to fire sale all of them because the bank flipped on me and pulled my lines. And not the same story, but just, you look back and you're like, wow, what would those have been worth? But you learn something, next time you're going to flip a house, don't do a $2 million house.
Totally. I learned a lot of things, but yeah, it's, I can't even, and for you, I'm sure it's the same. I can't even think about it though, right? It's heart wrenching to assume that. And I guess for me, there's a lot of things that I didn't do that would be also horrible, right? It's all part of it, as you know.
Now, so just real quick, let's just kind of finish up the trajectory of where we were heading. Like all these things happen. You have lots of ass kickings, but like, what are you doing nowadays? Like tell the audience a little bit about like life today. And then what I want to do is just kind of give some advice to today's pro snowboarders and athletes on things that maybe you could have done back during the times when you were making money that would have set you up better, and things maybe you wish you would have known back then. Because I think a lot of pro athletes, they're not told how money works, and they're definitely not told what to do with it. It's sort of just, try it, or trial by fire is kind of the easiest way. But I think there's a lot that we could do by getting, even if it's just one or two riders that listen to this episode, which I think will be a lot more, just a couple tips. So let's talk. Let's start with where you're at today.
Yeah. Well, I got remarried about, I think like a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, but been with my new lady for about 5 years. I have 3 kids, a 15-year-old, 11 and 7. Get to spend tons of time with them, which I didn't obviously as an athlete, and just kind of running around like a lunatic. So the foundation of life is amazing. Super grateful. Finally feel like on stable grounds. Like I said, I was doing a design and brand strategy agency. I started snowboarding a bunch again. That led to some new opportunities. So now working on a new beer company with New Belgium Brewing. Unfortunately, I can't fully unveil what it is, but it's just with an awesome group of people. It's just so inspiring to just like be building something again, and to be around people and smarter people, and trying to really create some change in the world. And obviously leveraging beer is kind of the exchange thing, but really just trying to change the narrative and change expectations, and create kind of a new symbol of what beer represents. So super grateful for that. I never thought I'd run a company again after getting sued and all the chaos, but I think like anything, you reflect, you learn, you grow, you understand that you're a completely different person, the way that you conduct yourself, the way you conduct business. And yeah, that's kind of, I guess, where I'm at now, and rebuilding on all stages, right? Same, like, just like all of your listeners, right? Just consuming content, trying to be inspired, trying to learn, trying to fill the holes, looking for ways to just be better, smarter, faster. I love growing. I love learning. And that's like the one thing, like when I get down on myself, it's just like, there's no excuses, because back in the day it was who you knew. And yes, I knew some people, and it was very helpful, but now it's just, everything's there, right? It's like, yes, you still have to make the decision and go, yes, I want to do this, which I found out later in life is a lot harder than it seems at sometimes, to go like really, make some hard decisions, go, this is what I'm going to take the next step with. But yeah, I love where the world is at right now, and it's super inspiring for me.
And I love seeing you with your kids out on the hill. So let's kind of take it over to the younger generations. We're getting old now, let's face it. I mean, we know it, but we're on to different things that kind of light our fire and get us back to that creation. But kids, I just think it's a tough world right now. Being a kid is a different environment than it used to be. Social media and all the pressures and all the things you feel like you have to live up to. So having kids of the different ages, what do you think some of the biggest things are as a dad that you've done for your kids that has really helped them? And what do you think other dads can do to get their kids ready for life, I guess is the best way to say it.
Well, I'm definitely not, I wouldn't say I'm the best dad for life advice, but I guess for me, I just try to love on them as much as humanly possible. I try to encourage them. I try to just share. I'm open about everything from drugs to failures, to successes, and everything with my kids. I remember being 10 years old and just thinking my parents were idiots. I assume that my kids, if they're not completely thinking that, they will be soon. And I think the time is just so different now than when we were kids. Like, I'm deep into AI stuff and listening to the greats speak about it, and it's super scary where the world is going and how things could look. And I try not to be a pessimist on that side, but just more just open to it. So I think if I can help build my kids' esteem, self-esteem, desire for something, and just love on them, to me, that feels like a formula. I asked my mom, because I was a pretty crazy child, like, hey, so like, what was your approach to raising me? And she's like, I knew if I could figure out or help you find something that you fall in love with, you'd probably be able to make money. And like that was her guiding principle. That's why when I, fell in love with basketball, she supported, or snowboarding, she supported, or didn't want to go to school for snowboarding. So I think it can be something that's very just simple, but she also made me feel safe. She didn't make me feel like I was trying to live for someone else. Right. I think she did a lot for other kids, for snowboarding. Again, it's a different time, right? It's a different way to make money. It's a different time to express yourself through it. I think having seen both lots of pros and people that didn't become pro, if you follow what you love, as my mom said, there's usually ways to make money. There's ways to support yourself, whether that's snowboarding, whether that's filming, whether that's team manager, whether that's a company. There's endless paths, but there's the culture that you develop by going that deep and falling in love with something that deep that's really hard to replace. So if you're hiring someone and it's like, oh, I got A or I got this guy, and they're both kind of the same, this person is truly in love with it and gets the culture of it. Usually that's the one that's always getting hired. So I don't know. It's tough, right? To be a pro athlete these days, I think it's tough. Where tricks are is crazy. You're signing up for stuff I never signed up for. But I've also met people that have it and they got the gumption, they got the skills. So it's also just super cool to see people do stuff you never thought possible.
Yeah, I think that's some great guiding principles. And that advice your mom gave you is, she basically just said, find something you love, find something you're passionate about, and you'll make money. I know it sounds so simple and it's like, oh, there should have been more that she gave me. But really, I think more might have convoluted where you actually ended up, because I think that's a problem with a lot of kids today. There's so much influence from outside. And, I think a lot of kids feel like they need to be what they see on Instagram or Facebook or all the social media platforms. Kids don't even use Facebook anymore. It's Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and who knows what's next. But they try to fit a mold that might not be their mold. And I think what your mom did is that, she supported you in the one thing that you went with. And I think that's really good advice for any parent, is just let your kids be kids. Let your kids chase their goals, their dreams. Maybe show them the way, introduce them to things, but don't force anything on them. Like, that's a hard thing. Like, I got a 3-year-old and I'm like telling my wife, I'm like, oh, I hope she wants to go snowboarding this winter. But if she doesn't, like, that's cool. But if she does, like, I'll give her the ability. It's just figure out what they love and give them the ability to do that. And I think that's some of the best advice. And also build their self-confidence. Let them know that what they're doing, whether it's even a failure in your eyes, like, let them know that they're doing good. Don't make them feel like failing is okay and everything, that they don't succeed at is okay, but let them know, like, they're doing their best. And I don't know, I got a lot I could learn being a dad, but I just know growing up, the one thing my mom did is let me dream and let me just be a kid and go out there and just try to hurt myself. Cause that's what we did on boards. We just went out and, let's be real. We just tried hurting ourselves. And when we didn't hurt ourselves, we're like, yep. All right, let's go higher and faster and just do more of that. And that's some good guiding principles for kids. And today with, pro snowboarders, I think you're right. Like, what they're signing up for, goodness gracious. I used to watch the video games and I'm like, that's not even possible. And today what they do is even better than what I used to remember in the video games. And it's all possible. And what they're doing today, it would be the equivalent of your McTwist, that like you could do it with your eyes closed. Like you mentioned, Shaun White, that was 80%. Like he just had it so dialed. But today the tricks the kids have, doubles, triples, just beyond, that's just, they're dialed in. It's just a different level. And I just think it's hard for us to look at it and be like, wow, that's hard. That's what I always think. And to them, it's just another day in the park.
Yeah, no, like you said, I think that what you said exactly. It's like the stuff that they do is crazier than the video game stuff that I used to think was so whack because it was so fake looking. And now you're like, holy cow, they're doing it. And they have airbags, they have training facilities, but you still actually have to take the snow, right? Like it's the funny part. It's like, oh, you get to train and learn, but hey, you still got to take it. So yeah, like you said, hats off. That's what I loved about snowboarding. What you thought was impossible one day, the next day, some kid would do it. Right. And I think that's most of life, but in sports, you really get to see it.
I love it, man. I love it. So just as we wrap up this episode, can you talk a little bit about like where people can learn or follow you or see, this new venture? I know you can't talk about it, but is there somewhere where they could watch the progression? Because it's really cool to see things get created. And this is a rare opportunity where people get to see you create something that could be massive. So where would they go to find that?
No, thanks. I'm not super on social, but just Keir Dillon for Instagram. The website for the company will be Open Brewing. That'll be the website. And then, I think just through those two portals, you'll kind of get a good look at what we have going on, what we're trying to do. And reach out to me if anyone has questions or ideas or thoughts. Definitely community generated. And like you, like them, we're all just trying to enjoy and create. So
absolutely.
I appreciate you having me on this.
Oh, it's been my honor and my privilege to have you on. And folks, all of you go to his Instagram. And what I want you to all do is I want you to scroll down. Remember, I talked about ass kicking number 1. Find that on his Instagram and just put a comment of one of your ass kickings in your life so that, we can all see how many of us have gotten our asses kicked. I think that would be a really cool project that all of you can do. And with that being said, the rest of it we'll put in the description so you can follow the progression of everything that Keir is doing. And to each of you, thank you for joining us for another episode. I appreciate your time, your energy, your effort that you put in to being here on this channel. We'll see you next time.
Right on. Thank you. Appreciate it.